last 35 years. Many of you are familiar. I've been teaching at the university, philosophy. My name is Richard Dean Winfield. And I decided to go on unpaid leave and run as a candidate for Congress in our 10th district. Because I want to advance a campaign for a new social bill of rights anchored in guaranteed jobs that is necessary in order to provide everyone with the economic independence and security they need to have equal opportunity in our society, to take care of their families, and to participate equally in our democracy. Our failure as a nation, and to some degree our failure as a party, to advance this agenda has put our democracy in jeopardy. And this is something that has not just happened in our nation, but in nations throughout the world. There is a specter haunting North America and much of Europe. It's not communism. It's a fear of joblessness, a fear of economic insecurity, and it's stoking a hatred of immigrants and minorities, and it's fostering the rise of demagogues, like our current president, and others in Europe, who are promoting what they call a kind of new nationalism, which in a way is a reversion to a form of fascism, which wants to uphold the particularities of certain ethnic identity and to tear down the notion of a free society grounded on rights and recognition of the freedom of all individuals. Now, the problem that we are facing is something rooted deeply in our history. It's a problem that has been there from the very beginning of our republic, in that our Constitution lays out our rights as citizens to participate in the political process. It speaks a bit about our civil rights to be equal before the law, but it says virtually nothing about our rights in society as participants in an economy and as family members. And although for most of the last 2 centuries we have been occupied with struggles to ensure that our political and civil rights would no longer be restricted to white men with property, but would extend in a consistent way to all adults, irrespective of race and gender and religion and origin. The very triumphs of the civil rights movement have highlighted how the political and civil rights of our Constitution are not enough, because it's quite evident that despite all of the advances won in extending political and civil rights to individuals of all races, to all genders, we have become a more and more unequal society. We are, as we all know, the most unequal society in the developed world, with the least social mobility. We cannot, in an honest way, tell our children that they will be able to have better opportunities than we enjoyed. As we all know, the top 1% own as much wealth as the bottom 90%. A quarter of all Americans have no positive wealth at all. 70% have no more than $700 in reserve against any calamity. And the inequalities between black and white and between men and women have hardly gone away. Now, at various junctures in our history, it's been pointed out in very important ways that we need something more than what our Constitution currently provides. More than 100 years ago, after the Civil War, when the emancipated slaves were beginning to enjoy the freedoms given by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that made them free, that gave them, at least men, voting rights, they gave all adults who were formerly slaves equality before the law. The newly emancipated slaves knew that this was not enough to be able to be free and equal. They needed to have the bases of economic independence and security, and that was formulated by them in terms of a demand for land and a demand for free public education. They didn't get the land. They did manage to institute, for the first time, free public education in the South, but it was separate and very unequal. 80 years later, FDR in his last address to Congress in 1944, told the nation that our Constitution is not sufficient to provide us with the resources we need to function as free citizens. We need what he called a new economic Bill of Rights that would guarantee everyone a livelihood, a job, affordable housing, health care, access to education, access to culture. He died soon after. His wife attempted to make this something that would be adopted by the whole world when she headed the committee that drew up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which incorporated all of the rights her husband had articulated in his speech. The whole world seemed to adopt that Universal Declaration, including the United States. But we know that it was not adopted in practice. And then we can look 20 years later to the time when Martin Luther King is now at his moment of triumph. He has had the Civil Rights Act passed, the Voting Rights Act passed, he's won the Nobel Prize, but he now realizes these victories, as important as they are not enough. We now need to turn to economic rights. And he calls for guaranteed jobs and for employee empowerment. He goes, as we know, to Memphis, but he's assassinated. 6 years later, his wife, Coretta Scott King, inaugurates an organization called the National Council for Full Employment to attempt to inaugurate a job guarantee and have it enacted by Congress. But her organization does not succeed. And this is forgotten. And so where are we? Well, we're in a position where today there are millions of Americans who want to work, but either do not have a full-time job or find themselves with a slew of part-time employments, and they're barely getting by. And that condition is being exacerbated by the looming advance of automation that is ready to move from manufacturing to the service industry, in which now 85% of us labor, and by the rise of the gig economy, where full-time jobs are being replaced by contract zero-hour labor. Well, I'm running to inaugurate and advance a social bill of rights grounded in guaranteed jobs that can overcome this situation and protect our democracy from the challenges that now face it. Now the core feature, which in a way is the signal plank of what I'm running on, is a federal job guarantee. This is intended to ensure that anyone who wants a job can have a job. Now, we all know that the market offers us opportunities to be an entrepreneur if we have sufficient capital or access to credit. We can attempt to earn a living through profit, dividends, rent. But if we are, in any case, unsuccessful in that enterprise, we know that we have to fall back on what everyone else has to rely upon, namely their capacity to work, to have a job. Which, as it turns out, and not by accident, is what 90% of us who earn a living must do in order to support themselves and their families. So in a sense, ensuring that we all have jobs is really the bedrock of economic independence and security. And the very fact that millions of people do not, and millions of people have part-time rather than full-time employment, is indicative of how the market, through the very workings of competition, is continually driving certain enterprises out of business and requiring those that are succeeding to continually revise their production and marketing techniques, which causes all sorts of turmoil in the labor market. So if we are really to provide individuals with the fundamental economic independence and security they need to exercise any other freedoms on a par with others, our government has to really show that it is for, of, and by the people by putting people to work, and not putting them to work in make-work situations or having them duplicate what is already being done by private industry, but rather to tackle all of those goods and services that our communities need, but which private enterprise is either unwilling or unable to provide. And we all know that there is much that needs to be done. We all know that our infrastructure is in tatters. But beyond that, we all know that we really need a new green infrastructure if we're going to seriously address climate change. We need to put people to work to do that. We know also, especially if you go out into the small town rural Georgia surrounding us, that vast numbers of our community do not have broadband access. And you cannot exercise your rights in any equal way today if you do not have broadband access. So we have to put people to work to provide broadband for all. And we need to provide decent housing to everyone. Substandard housing is littering the landscape. And there's not a sufficient supply of affordable housing. We need to put people to work to do this. And we need, of course, to provide public transportation. Because both in Athens and especially outside of Athens, throughout the 10th district, people are stranded who don't have cars. They can't get to work, they can't get to medical treatment, they can't see their family, their friends, they can't go shopping, they can't take advantage of what relatively limited cultural opportunities there are available in the district. Well, we need to have people put to work in providing public transportation. And we need to refurbish all our public facilities, from schools to hospitals to parks. And we have to provide the care that people are lacking. Child care, elder care, and we have to provide cultural opportunities. Because it's lacking. People don't have access to all the arts. Now this is a huge undertaking. And in a way it requires being organized at a federal and state and local level. But it's not something that is impossible to do. And it's been proven that it's possible. Right here in this country, because as we all know, back in the Depression, under FDR, more than 8.5 people were put to work, producing, our greatest public infrastructure, our most enduring cultural legacies, and this was done at a time when we had less than 100 million people. The wealth of the nation was 6% of what it is today. And we were in the midst of the greatest economic crisis in our history. So this is something that can be done. And I think if you reflect on it, it's easy to see how transformative it is. Think, for example, of people who are coming of age, who at a point where they're ready to enter the job market, but they're facing double the unemployment of the rest of us. And if they're a minority, they're facing quadruple the rate of unemployment. If we're ever going to eliminate the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, we have to solve this problem, and we can do it with the job guarantee, because think of how the insecurity and to some degree hopelessness of the young would be completely supplanted if they all knew they had a job awaiting them that can serve their communities. Think of its impact upon crime, because what if everyone knows they have a legal way of earning a livelihood that is meaningful and serves their community? Think of the prospects of people coming out of prison, who now have even grimmer prospects than they had, of course, when they were tempted to land up in prison or did end up in prison for whatever the reason may be. Well, we will live in a completely different world if everyone coming out of prison knows they have a job awaiting them. Think of the shameful way we treat our veterans, who, by the way, are disproportionately people of color. They come back, presumably protecting our nation, sacrificing their health and safety. And they come back with no security, with no guarantee that they will have a job awaiting them. And so if you wander around the streets of Athens, you are bound to come upon homeless veterans who have served for their country, but come back and there's no work awaiting for them. A job guarantee would transform that. And a job guarantee will also transform the lives of us who have employment, because it will lift the fear of losing one's job and not having anything to depend upon. A fear that, in a way, is tremendously responsible for making people think twice or 3 times about blowing the whistle on sexual harassment on the job, about discrimination in the workplace, about other malfeasance of employers. And also, it's something that will diffuse the intense antipathy, hatred of immigrants and the undocumented on the part of those who feel that their livelihoods may be at risk, their wages depressed. Because if everyone can be sure of employment, we're going to be in a position where we can engage in comprehensive immigration reform. Now, this is a game changer. And it is something, however, that has not been advocated in recent decades by anyone. But it's time that we do so. And I think we also have to think in that connection with how this will be good for business, big or small. Because if you have full employment, you have the maximum consumer demand. You eliminate the fluctuations in consumer demand that fluctuations in unemployment represent. You have protection against the ups and downs of business cycles and the onset of recessions and depressions. Now, of course, when we talk about guaranteed jobs, we also have to think about what wages we deserve. Because we all know, particularly living in a city like Athens, which is the poorest city in the nation of its size, that there are thousands of people working 1, 2, 3 jobs precisely because they're paid poverty wages. Now, there's much talk of ensuring that we have a minimum wage and there's a living wage. But a living wage is not enough. A living wage, in a sense, provides a sort of genteel poverty and does not prevent wages from becoming a shrinking part of the national wealth, which is what has happened since 1973. We need to think of a fair wage, where wages grow in conjunction with the growth of our economy and the growth of productivity. That occurred from 1945 till 1973. Wages, by and large, increased in lockstep as productivity and our national wealth increased. And that meant that most Americans experienced an increase in standard of living. When that stopped in 1973, and it has remained a situation where wages have stagnated, there have been the following catastrophic results. On the one hand, we have become an increasingly unequal society where the amount of wealth or income that goes into wages has fallen to an all-time low. And all of that wealth of economic expansion is going to the top. And that has led not only to the disempowerment and inequality that's affecting our society, but it's also led to economic stagnation. Because when you have that growing inequality in the distribution of wealth, you have these huge hordes among the 1% or the top 10%. And it simply cannot be spent. It can't simply be spent and put back into the economy. It's held in speculative investments in financial assets instead of being productively invested. If we ensure that there is a new national minimum wage that is a fair wage, that is tied to productivity gains, we can reverse the growth in inequality and economic stagnation, because there has been real economic stagnation. That's not to say the economy is not growing. The market requires firms to grow in order to survive, but our growth is half of what it had been during those decades when wages did rise with economic growth and productivity. Now, these are fundamental transformative measures, guaranteeing employment, ensuring fair wages. But in some respect, they leave an important part out of our situation. That is the dignity that should be part of earning a livelihood. And this has to do with restoring the balance between employer and employee. Because the dynamic of competition requires enterprises to grow and concentrate in order to succeed. And that means that there's an imbalance in the power of enterprises and the situation of employees. And we need to reverse that. Not to give employees and their interests some superiority, but rather to ensure that our society is fair, that all economic interests have a fair say. And there are two sides of this. On the one hand, we need to transform the structure of the dominant form of enterprise organization, namely the shareholding corporation. Today, the board of directors involves no representation of employees. You have people, in some respect, elected by shareholders. They're in cahoots with the CEOs. They make all the fateful decisions concerning downsizing, concerning sending jobs elsewhere, introducing automation. We need to change that. And we need to change that in a fundamental way by ensuring and mandating that 50% of the membership in corporate boards go to the representatives of non-managerial employees. This has been done elsewhere, as most of the things I'm speaking about and will be speaking about. It has been done elsewhere. It's been notably done in Germany, where not unsurprisingly manufacturing has continued to exist in a strong way, instead of being dismembered by corporate boards that are interested more in stock values than the integrity of production. Well, that's one side of it, ensuring that employees have a fair say in private enterprise. On the other hand, we need to ensure that employees can engage in collective bargaining with their employers. Right now, employees are more disempowered than ever in our lifetime. Union membership is down to 6% in the private sector, and unions are finding it impossible to increase their organization. So we need to change that. We need to mandate that every enterprise that has multiple workers, whether they're part-time, full-time, gig economy, freelancers, that they engage in collective bargaining with the elected representatives of their employees. These measures will fundamentally transform, in some respect, the balance of power in our economy. Woodrow Wilson, at the turn of the century, was inveighing against the rise of corporate power and how it was undermining our democracy. Well, we can transform the operations of our economy from within with these measures of fair employee empowerment. Now, these three measures, guaranteed jobs, fair wages tied to productivity, employee empowerment, are crucial to having a fair society, to set the stage for the elimination of poverty, to set the stage for eliminating intergenerational disadvantage. But there are a few more things that have to be added to the mix that I want to briefly point to. One has to do with achieving a proper balance between work and family. You know, it's been 50 years since there's been the Equal Pay Act, and yet women still lag men in income, in retirement benefits, in positions of power in the economy and politics. And much of the reason for this lies in the failure of our community to ensure that our working life is organized in such a way that we can take care of our family duties without undercutting our livelihood and our career advancement. And there are two things that have to be done, two sides of it. On the one hand, we have to mandate and require all employers to give paid family leave, to give 1 month paid vacations, which you have commonly in other parts of the world, to ensure that one has paid, not unpaid, paid emergency family leave, and we have paid 9-month parental leave, so that when new babes come into the world, their parent or parents can take care of them without disrupting their economic livelihood. On the other hand, we have to deal with the fact that childcare and elder care is becoming unaffordable for large parts of the population, making it impossible to continue working if one is to deal with these issues. And as we all know, women bear a disproportionate burden in dealing with both of these aspects. Single parent families are headed by women 83% of the time. The family members who care for the elderly who cannot care for themselves are women in 2/3 of the cases. Well, we can, and needless to say, women lag in wages, in retirement benefits, in advancing their career, because given how we've organized things, it's very difficult to escape those burdens. But we can do it. We can eliminate it. We can have free childcare and free elder care, just as we decided to have free public education. We can have free childcare, free elder care. It's been done in other countries. And if we really want to wipe out childhood poverty, we need to have child allowances. And I'm suggesting at least $500 per child per month so that this horrible stain on our nation, where almost half of our children are growing up in poverty, is removed once and for all. And these measures taken together are really necessary to provide women with true reproductive freedom. Because you are not really free to determine your reproductive life if you are in a situation where economic circumstances compel you to not have the children you want to have because you can't support them. But if we have guaranteed jobs, if we have fair wages, if we have employee empowerment, if we have these measures to balance work and family, then anyone who really wants to have children can have them and not face the limitations that so many people face. Now, of course, none of us can function anyway if we can't maintain our health. We need to ensure that health care is a right, and a single-payer system is really the most plausible way of doing this. First, it covers everyone. It simplifies reimbursements and eliminates expense and all the clerical nightmare that is faced when you have a private insurance system with multiple programs and all the advertising expenses and the like. And it puts all of us in the strongest position to negotiate lower prices for health care and drugs. In that way, we can reduce our health care costs in half, because we as a nation are spending twice as much as any other developed nation on health care, $10,000 per person, whereas it's $5,000 or so for most developed nations. And they're caring better for their people than we are. Now, many talk of health care becoming a right by having Medicare for all. I'm old enough to know that Medicare is not good enough. I'm too affluent to know that Medicaid is not good enough directly, but I've read about it, and I know that both these programs have co-pays, deductibles, they don't cover all medicine expenses, and as a result, there are many people who have Medicare and Medicaid who can't afford to use it. So we need to have a super Medicare for everyone with no co-pays and no deductibles and no charges whatsoever. How do we pay for this? Well, we can easily pay for it by having a fair tax system, which shifts the burden of taxation to those who have benefited most from the work, the military service, and the government system that we all contribute to. And we can do this by highly graduated income and wealth taxes. Now, we have two other things I want to bring into play before I come to a climax and a conclusion. We also have to think about education, because clearly, as the freed slaves knew, we cannot really operate as equals unless we have equal access to education at all levels. Well, we do not have equal access to education at all levels, despite the fact that we do have a public school system now in all the states. We know perfectly well that because it's largely financed by property taxes, the amount of support our schools get depends upon the affluence or the wealth of property in different districts. We have to change that. We have to make sure that there is equal support everywhere for students in the nation. And we have to improve the quality and the support for teachers and for the curriculum. So we need to really require that teachers have an MA, at least new teachers have an MA in the area of their specialty. The heads of departments in public schools have PhDs in the area of their specialty. We should furnish at a national level the resources to ensure that at all levels students can take a phys ed class every day. They can take art or music classes every day. And then when they make it to high school, they can take philosophy for 2 years. So that we can have a population that can think about the good life and truth, not just fake news.
Philosophy students can be put to work.
And of course that will solve the
Teaching in high
unemployment
school.
problem of my PhD students. But we have to think about doing these things in the public school system. But on the other hand, when we come to what lies beyond the public schools, we have to ensure that anyone who is qualified can go to technical schools or colleges, irrespective of their wealth. We need free tuition, but we need more than that. My father was admitted to City College, which was that unique institution. It was free tuition, but he couldn't manage to go because he had to work and help support his family. So we need to supply living stipends, as well as free tuition to everyone. Now, I here have given you a recipe for what I think is genuinely a new birth of freedom. A set of programs that realize and recognize rights that allow everyone to truly have equal opportunity at all levels, and to provide the basis for eliminating poverty. Not thinking about how we're going to benefit the middle class, but bringing everyone up so we don't even have to think about the middle class, which, after all, presupposes a lower class. But there's one last thing we have to think about, and that is that we cannot protect our rights if we don't have equal access to the law. And we are not equal before the law in this country. Wealth still makes a fundamental difference. Our Constitution does grant all of us the right for legal representation in criminal matters. But we know that that is handled in a way where it's underfunded. We have legal aid lawyers, we have court-appointed lawyers. They're not given as much resources as a well-heeled private lawyer may have. On the other hand, we're not able to have representation in civil cases unless we have the resources to do so. And the inability of many people to do that is one of the reasons why individuals remain so vulnerable to sexual harassment and racial discrimination, because they don't have the legal resources to sue their victimizers. We need to have a legal aid for all, a single-payer system for covering the legal expenses of all personal, criminal, and civil representation, where we would be able to go to any lawyer we want. The services would be paid for by a publicly funded insurance, and the public would negotiate with legal practitioners just as they would do with healthcare providers to keep costs in line. With this, we would all be able to stand up for our rights. Now, the program I put before you is bold. I don't think you've heard it before. I don't know of any other candidate who's putting it all out there, especially the key measure of guaranteed jobs. And you might wonder, well, is it really possible? Well, first of all of the measures I've spoken about have been realized to a large degree in other places. Even though I'm putting forward some things that haven't been adopted, but aspects of them have been adopted. And it can be done in this, the richest nation in human history. We have the resources to do this. We could become great in the true sense of being the most just nation in human history. And I offer my candidacy as an historical opportunity, because I feel I'm giving you an option you have never had before, and you may never have again. And it represents an opportunity for us to be pioneers. We can put our small town, Georgia, rural District 10 on the map of history, just as MLK put Selma on the map of humanity's struggle for human freedom. We can do something great here. Now, I know some of you wonder about whether I am a candidate who could win against Jody Heiss. And I've heard from some people that they cannot support me because I'm not a Christian who can wave the New Testament in the face of Jody Heiss. I've also heard Democrats, both black and white, who say they can't support a candidate for governor who is black, because there's no way an African American can win the race for governor. And I've heard from Deborah Gonzalez herself that Democrats told her that she should not use her name Gonzalez, but should instead go by the last name of her husband, who was an Anglo. Well, I mean, should we be capitulating to anti-Semitism, to Islamophobia, to anti-Hindu feeling, to anti-Hispanic feeling? Should we be capitulating to white supremacy? Or should we stand up as Democrats to try to transform the thinking of the people in our district? Now, I know many people think that Hillary Clinton was right in characterizing the voters who gave Donald Trump a 2/3 majority in District 10, that they are deplorable, fools. Well, they made a horrible voting decision. But they're human beings who have an irrepressible core which involves a hunger for truth and justice, but they're driven by fear. Fear of joblessness, fear of economic insecurity. And for that reason, they're open to the appeals of demagogues. Donald Trump did not win his election by telling the people of Georgia or the South or anywhere else that he was a credible Christian. He didn't tell them that he had roots in small towns or had long roots in the South. He didn't tell them about the medical problems of his children or the hard travails he had suffered with or his parents had suffered with in making their way up in the world. Instead, he cut to the chase. He said, I can bring jobs back to America. I alone can do it. Well, he doesn't have the answer, and he hasn't done it. But there is an answer. And if that answer can be argued for and articulated in a meaningful way, many Trump supporters can be shown the light. And that alone is going to provide the victory of a Democrat in the 10th district. There is a path to victory. And it's not a path that is going to be paved by political cowardice. It's going to require that we be bold, that we stand up for a social rights agenda anchored in guaranteed jobs. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to ask you to join with me. I need your votes. I need your powers of persuasion. I need your volunteering. I may need a little bit of your money. But above all, I need your historical ambition. I need you to rise to the occasion and join together in making history together. Thank you.
Will you take some questions?
Definitely. Sure.
Questions? I have a question. I don't want to be the first or the only.